Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Katie, I'm a full-time mixed media artist, and today I'm trying out something totally new. So I really enjoy plein air painting, which is the French word for drawing outside. So I really enjoy doing that, but as a mixed media artist and like taking out my gouache paints, which is a medium I really enjoy using as my base, it's a bit of a faff having to have individual tubes. I always have to mix them on the palette when I'm there and then have to wait for it to dry before I can then pack it in my bag and come home. So if you saw last week's video, which was a haul, I'll link it up in the corner if you missed it, you'll see that I bought a watercolor palette, which is this one by Mijello, and I'm going to fill it with gouache. So quite a quick intro today because I'm going to talk you through all of the colours I'm going to be filling this with, and then we're going to head outside and I'll show you what we get up to. So I hope you enjoy this video. Let's get filling our gouache palette. Okay, so I feel like we're keeping things quite simple. We've got my watercolour palette, which I'm going to fill with gouache. We've got my tin of all my gouache tubes, which I'm going to use to fill this. We've also got some vegetable glycerin. Now this is used to sort of extend the life. With gouache it usually cracks and dries, and so this helps to keep it nice and moist in there. And then I've got some cocktail sticks which I'm going to use to stir things around. So you can probably tell by the lighting the sun keeps coming in and out, so apologies if the lighting changes. But I'm going to go ahead and fill my palette. So if you saw my haul video last week, you'll know that I don't actually plan on filling all of these 18 holes. I guess it depends on how many colours I want to put in my palette, but I don't think I'll use them all. I'm not going to fill every single one with all of these colours. All I'm going to do is pick my favourites. So generally I know which ones I use with my landscapes, I know which ones I go for more than others. And I think that's how I'm going to do it. So I rarely use Purple Lake, so I probably won't put this in. So let me pick out all of my favourite colours and we'll go from there. So I definitely want to use a Naples yellow. We've got the Oxide of Chromium. I think I've got a newer one of those in here. This one's slightly old and a bit sticky. Yeah, here it is. So I'm going to go with that one. I'm going to go with two types of yellow. It does help to have a warm and a cool yellow. We've got the Cadmium Yellow Hue and then the Permanent Yellow Deep. I do also have the Primary Yellow, which is a much cooler toned yellow, which might be better than the Permanent Yellow Deep. I'll have a think about that one. Blues, I definitely want different types of blues. So we've got the Ultramarine Deep and the Primary Blue. We've got Portrait Pink, I really like this one. I've also got a Flesh Pink, I think, in here, which I'm just going to go with the Portrait Pink, I think. Here it is. So it's slightly different. I think I'll just go with Portrait Pink. I can always add to this, like this isn't the be-all and end-all palette. I can add to it as I go. Burnt Umber, that's a really nice dark tone. I use that a lot to like darken my greens because I don't use black. Primary Red. Now I don't use many reds, so I'm not sure about taking a red. Warm Grey I'll take. Linden Green, a really bright neon yellowy green. Take that one. Raw Sienna, that's a really good one. What's this one? Ultramarine. I've already got... Ooh, do I want to take Ultramarine Deep or Ultramarine? I think I'll go with Ultramarine, so swap that one in. I'm going to take another green. So obviously at the moment I've got my Linden Green and my Oxide of Chromium. But I think a permanent green middle would be good. What's this one? Yellow Ochre. I might not need both of those. Let's see how we go. I think that's it. The one thing that you'll notice is I'm not taking a white, and I will take a white when I'm out, but I'm taking it in my big tube. I'm not going to just put it in here. It's going to get super muddy and dirty, so I prefer to put that separately on my palette with the big tube that I take. So I'll just grab that and show you. This is my hefty white, so because I use so much white when I mix up my gouache, I don't want to just put a tiny amount in here. With the others I just squeeze a little bit out, but this one I always use a lot, and I just know it's going to get grubby if I keep it in my palette. So I'll be taking this with me separately and I'll put it onto like my mixing side of my palette when I'm mixing up my colours. So I think that's it now. I'll decide about the reds. So I think that's everything. I'm not going to take blacks or really, which one's this? Brilliant green. Sometimes I use orange. This is getting quite dried up, so I think I'll leave that there. You might be able to tell as well, some of my tubes are really crinkled, and that's because I use a toothpaste squeezer to get as much gouache out as I can. So that's why they look like that. But I think that's it. So let's count up how many I have. Maybe I have more than I think. 14, 15. So I'm closer to filling up the 18 than I thought. I could pare this down a lot. Like I could take out maybe the raw sienna instead of the ochre. I could take out maybe a green, but I think we're going to go with that. This is generally the colours I use for my landscapes. I can mix other colours from these colours, and it just means that they feel a bit more in keeping when I do my colour palettes. If they're mixed from the ones I'm already using on the page, it feels a bit more cohesive. So that's still more than I expected. Let's go around the palette and start filling them. I've got my cocktail sticks to stir them in, and I'm going to do a drop of glycerin in each one as well. I guess I should also decide on my order. I'm not too worried, but I think it would be good if, like, maybe I'll start with yellows. Oh yes, do I want to have 3 yellows? I use cadmium yellow all the time, and I don't often use the primary yellow. I think maybe I'll do that one and take that out. Then we'll have Naples yellow, then flesh tint, then we'll do ochres, then we'll do maybe greens. Oh, I've got a pink there as well. Oh, I said I wasn't going to do flesh tint. I was going to just do portrait pink, grey, brown, and then blues. Okay, so we got it down to 13. Like I said, I can add to this. I can add to it if I feel like something's missing. I'm not going to be like super strict with myself. So let's start filling my palette. I don't want to fill them too much. So this is going to be a bit of trial and error. So that's way more gouache than I would normally like put onto my tear off paper palette. But obviously we're going to be going into this quite a lot. So let's go with our next yellow. Oh yes, that's good. So you can really see the different tones there in those yellows. This one is much warmer. If you're unsure about which colours to take, I would say depends on what you paint. If you paint lots of landscapes, then there might be a few more natural tones. If you like drawing people, then maybe you have a wider range of like skin tones. Just go with your favourites, and then you can always add to it. So it doesn't matter if we come back to this and add more as we go. This will be an ongoing thing. Obviously I'm planning on doing more plein air over the summer, so in the summer months I might feel like I need to add some other colours. I'm going to leave this to settle for a few days, so when I do come to use them, I think they might have started to dry. It depends. It will be really interesting to see. I think it will be helpful to see if the vegetable glycerin helps, because they will dry up a little bit, so it'll be interesting to see just how much. So this is already looking really nice. I like these colours, so that's a good sign that I've picked some good ones. Some of them do feel thicker. I think it depends on the pigment, but I'm going to put it on time lapse now whilst I fill the rest of these slots. Okay, so the one that I haven't been able to add in is the warm grey. It's completely dried up in the tube, which is a shame. I can't get any out of that, so that's something I need to reorder, and maybe I'll add that in later. I said that I wasn't going to put in the Scarlet Lake. I don't use much purple, but if I did want purple, I wouldn't be able to mix it from these colours. I might be able to do a blue and a bit of the portrait pink, but I think I'm going to add in the purple as an option. I've used lilac in a few pieces lately, so you never know, I could be going into my purple phase. We'll see if this gets used much, but I'm going to stop there, but I've still got a few wells, so it's going to be trial and error. If I feel like something's missing, I've got space to add them in. So now let's add in our drop of glycerin to each little hole. Because when you squeeze out fresh gouache like this, it's very pigmented, and when you let it dry and then you reactivate it, which is probably what will happen, obviously with it being in a palette like this, it definitely changes the consistency of like your painting. It becomes a bit more watery, and like you can't use it as thick because you're having to reactivate it. Be interested to see just how airtight this is. I've also seen a few videos about having issues with mould. Now, I've seen that with the Himi gouache, which I do have, of people getting mould in them. But I have never had mould in my Himi gouache set. So I think it depends on where you are in the world and like the humidity in your area. But I haven't had issues, so I'm not expecting to get mould. But I think if you use some rubbing alcohol, I think in your paint and mix that in, that's supposed to help. Sometimes I do add some red to my greens, but maybe I will put red in. I always like talking things through, so it's helpful to have a YouTube channel, and like just when I'm doing this, I can change my mind, so I think I will add a red in. I think it will be helpful to have. I mean, I probably won't use much, but I'm going to fill it up anyway. So that is my 14 colours. This is my plein air painting palette for my gouache. So I'm really excited to give this a go. I'm really looking forward to painting on location and testing this palette out. But until then, we will close it up and I'll show you in the next section of the video how these have fared. Here are the things that I'm taking. So I'm taking this homemade pencil roll, which I made a couple of years ago. I've put my water brush pens in the back. They are super handy for when I am plein air painting. I used to take a little pot and a jug of water, but then I had to get rid of the dirty water, and it just makes it so much easier by having them in the water brushes. So I'm just tying that up. I'm also obviously taking the palette that you just saw me fill, putting that in my tote bag, and then the only other things I take with me are a little fold-away stool, obviously my sketchbook, and also my camera and my tripod to obviously film it for this YouTube video. So this is where I'm painting today. This is a nature reserve, so it's got this lovely lake. I have painted here a couple of times. You might have seen on my Instagram or my YouTube, but I just found this quiet little spot. It's generally where the fishermen come, so it was really quiet this day, and you can tell it was quite misty and foggy. So it was very calm, and although I prefer to have blue skies, and I do sort of edit the painting that I do to have a bit more blue in the sky, I still found it was really nice to paint, and I really like it when it's a quiet area, so I don't feel like I'm interrupting, and I didn't have anybody come over or speak to me or anything. So this is my setup. I found a view across the lake that I really liked, and I'm just drawing some panels into my sketchbook. Now here I am opening up my palette for the first time. You'll see that it has already been used, so I filmed a Patreon tutorial the Sunday previously, so that's why the palette is already a bit messy. But the one thing that changed since then, so this is a week after I filled the palette that you've just seen me talk through, is that two of the paints kind of fell out of their wells. You can see the green and also the ochre. The ochre managed to just like fly over to the other side of the palette somehow, and then the green has sort of just slipped out. But all the other paints stayed in their wells, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about that in the extra as well. Other than that, I did find they were still quite wet, so that really does hold true that this is quite an airtight palette. I was really impressed. I didn't need to spray them to reactivate. I did take a little mister to be able to do that, but I didn't need to. They were still really wet and they felt like fresh gouache. One of the things that I did forget was my white gouache, so luckily there was still a bit of white on the palette from my Sunday session when I was filming for Patreon, and so that was really helpful because I did totally forget that, and I also forgot my kitchen towel, so I didn't have anything to wipe my brushes. Now that's another reason why I take quite a lot of brushes, so not only to have different sizes, but also because I can have different colours. So I try to keep one brush for sort of browns, one brush for greens, and then one for lighter colours, so the sky and the water. And that just means that it stops things from getting too muddy, especially because I didn't have a pot of water to like wash them in, and I also didn't have any towel to wipe them off. So it is always a bit of an adventure when you are plein air drawing, but I definitely made it a bit harder for myself by forgetting these things, but I was still really pleased with the art that I did create. You'll see that some of it is a bit loose and a little bit messy. Where I was sat on the stool and trying to get things in shot for the camera, I was quite far away from my sketchbook, so you can see here where I'm being a bit wobbly with my lines, and that's just because I'm trying to reach over just so that I could get some footage in shot. It was easier for me to focus it on the ground than holding it on my lap. So you'll see in some of the shots where the sketchbook is a bit too overexposed, and that's just because I'm doing this solo and it is really hard to be able to focus my camera. But generally, I think the art did come out okay, despite the wobbliness. Sometimes I think it's good to just embrace that sort of looseness. Working a bit further away and not having that brush control definitely meant that I was a little bit looser than I would normally be. And it also meant that I couldn't be really tight, so I couldn't add a huge amount of details. And I think that works all right for the final piece. So I am using the gouache quite watered down, but like I said, it was quite thick in the palette. I'm going to keep you updated as to when I need to refresh it, if I do need to spray water on it next time I use it. It was a week since I did it, so I was really impressed that it was still quite gouachy and wet, as if I had just squeezed it from the tube. Here you can see my setup a little bit better. So the stool that I'm sat on, which does fold down really neatly, is a little, I think it's usually used for fishing. Usually I do sit on a blanket, but it was very wet and muddy when I filmed this, so it actually worked really well to have this stool. It was very, very short, but it does put me a little bit higher than the ground. But I think in the summer months, I do prefer to be closer to the ground, and especially when I am filming, because then I won't get shots like this where it's too overexposed. I am usually a fair weather plein air artist, so I usually do only go out when it's nice. But because the weather has been so poor lately, I'm really glad I went, and I think the stool will really help me to not have to sit on the muddy ground, and I'll still be able to film for you. So who knows whether the English weather will improve, but hopefully you're enjoying this session. And I think sometimes the mistiness and the different weather does help. I've never gone out when it's actually raining. I've seen that creates different textures on your page, so I guess it just depends what you prefer. I usually do prefer going out in the sunshine, but it was really nice to be able to do this even if the sun wasn't shining as much as I'd like. So I moved on to the second panel on the right, which is kind of just a more zoomed in version of the view I'm drawing here on the left. And I did the gouache layer on the right, and now the left has dried. I'm coming back in with my pencils. It was quite a wet day, like I said, so it took a little bit longer than usual to dry, but not too bad. I just have to sort of work out and do the second panel before coming back to the first, just to allow it to dry a little bit more, because I really enjoy adding on my pencil layer, adding on a few more details, and then you'll see I do add on a bit of Neocolor at the end, and generally that is the way I prefer to work. So try to just add on little details like the grass, a bit more pop of colour. I really liked that red sign, which was over the lake, and so I was really glad I did add that red in the end. I think I'll mostly use it to dirty up my greens. I find that works really nicely to make them a bit more natural, especially that brighter green I added to the palette. But I was glad to have it for this one, and I think that the colours that I put in my palette is a really good set. I didn't feel like I was missing any colours. I didn't use the purple in this one, but I did use it in that Patreon tutorial that I mentioned I filmed, and it's just a really nice contrast colour, and I use that for shadows, and I really like the way that looks. So throughout the 2 sessions I've used this palette so far, I've used most of the colours, and I'm really pleased with it so far. So here's a little look at the final piece, so you can see all my different panels and some close-ups of the details of the landscapes I did whilst drawing outside. When I got home from this painting session, I did film a little wrap-up, so that's coming up next. Okay, so I'm back home now. Obviously you'll have heard me talking a little bit about these issues, but I just want to do a wrap up. That was probably the hardest plein air session I've had. It was really muddy, it was really grey, and I found things a little bit difficult because I obviously had my tripod with me. It's really hard to get the angles to try and make sure everything was in focus. So when I have just checked the footage, I'm pleasantly surprised that most of it is in focus, because I really struggled to see the screen when I was painting. Now, in terms of the gouache palette, as you saw in the video, there were some issues, mostly because some of the paint totally moved and came out of the actual wells that they were in. So interestingly, it was the ochre and the green completely moved. I don't know how this ended up over here without smushing everywhere else, but just these two that moved. And you'll see that I obviously didn't move them when I was out there when I was doing my plein air art, but I'm just going to try and scoop it up with a paintbrush and put them back where they're supposed to be. So you can tell that obviously they are still quite wet. They haven't dried matte, so I think that's a really good positive point about this being completely airtight. So when I do seal it, I was expecting them to have dried up a little bit, maybe even cracked, and maybe that's because I put in the vegetable glycerin, but I'm really chuffed that it has stayed as wet as it is. The only thing is obviously it does move, so I tried to keep this as flat as possible in my bag, but it obviously moved at some point, which meant that some of the paint escaped. But other than that, I think like the success rate of them all staying in there was pretty high. And yeah, I'm really happy with the consistency, and obviously I will continue using this. It was so helpful to not have to have tubes of paint to then put onto my paper palette. I really love the portability. I think I will be using this so much, and even in the studio I think this is quicker to grab than having to get all my tubes out. So I think this will get a hell of a lot of use, and as we go through, as it does dry further, I'm going to check in with you. So there will be a future video probably similar to this one where I'm using this again, but you might see this throughout some of my future videos anyway. So I will keep you updated in terms of if it does dry out and how much I'm using it. But for my second go using this, because as I mentioned the first one was for a Patreon video, I am super chuffed. I really like this. It's super handy and portable. You'll have seen what I packed was just my pencil roll and this, and obviously my sketchbook. And that made it super easy. I wasn't lugging loads of different things. Obviously I did forget my white, but I'm really pleased, and I think this is going to be an absolute staple in my art toolkit. So all in all, I think that was a very successful session, despite it being one of the trickiest ones I've had, just because of the setup and the weather and everything being quite muddy and grubby. I'll put in a picture here where I wiped my brush on my boot. My bag is completely covered in mud, but overall I had a great time, and I think that's just the hazards of being an artist, is just making a mess. So huge thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. I know it's slightly different because we were plein air painting, but hopefully it's inspired you to get outside and create there too. The biggest thank you to my patrons for their support. Without them, I wouldn't be able to create all of this free content on YouTube, so a big shout out to them. I hope you have a creative week ahead, and I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later!